Thank you everyone for joining us for today's BJSS webinar as part of Leeds Digital Festival. Today's session is Mind the Gap, should DevOps approaches really try and eliminate silos? We are recording today's session and we do want you to ask questions and it to be as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A functionality. Without further ado, I will hand you over to Ian Watson, our DevOps strategy consultant.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. So, as Karen said, I'm Ian Watson. I'm DevOps strategy consultant at BJSS. I've got many decades of experience working in software development and operations, and now help people with changing how their business is set up and how they deliver software, hopefully in a better way. Ian?
And good afternoon, I'm Ian Harris. I'm head of AWS technology at BJSS. Similarly, I've got more years than I care to remember in the industry, and I've worked in a wide variety of roles, from software development all the way through platform engineering, infrastructure consultancy, architecture, and ops. So I've done both sides of that particular DevOps fence. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to chat today about silos, and that one thing that I think the whole DevOps mantra has been for the last 10 years about tearing them down and destroying them. What we would love is to have a bit of a conversation around it as much as we can in the webinar format. So please feel free to ping questions as we go along and we will answer them probably at the end. Okay. First things first. Oh, that's us. Second things first. Okay, what is a silo? What are we actually talking about? So I visited the dictionary and this is what it came up with. We are not going to be talking about trenches, pits, or tall cylinders. And equally, I'm afraid, you'll probably be disappointed, some of you, we're not going to be talking about underground structure for housing guided missiles. So that would undoubtedly be an exciting talk. The silo we're talking about today is an isolated grouping, department, etc., that functions apart from others. Okay, firstly, a bit of history lessons. Okay, I will say, oh, is that going to show up? This is a really great book on the entire history of mankind and how it's evolved from very earliest days right up to where we are now, ruling and wrecking the planet. But one of the big things it picks up on are silos and how they have naturally occurred over time based on a human need. So for the bulk of existence, people have lived in silos. And that has to be because they are in some way effective. People survived because the silo, the grouping they were in, knew each other intimately and could trust each other. Jane helped Jill fight enemies. Joe helped Jack hunt bears. Our social instincts helped our ancestors to form those friendships, hierarchies, to hunt, forage, and live together, basically, and allowed them to survive in what would have been an exceedingly hostile environment. So these social instincts of humans that we have then evolved throughout time were adapted for small groups. And what we've seen throughout history again is when the grouping got too large, for a certain distinction of too large, something would destabilize the social order and the group would split up. This was often in the shape of things like religious schisms. There would suddenly be a disagreement over the right way to worship your particular deity, and the two groups would split and move away again in smaller groups. Essentially, though, there was no way that large amounts of virtual strangers could live together. So the most important thing to know about humans and silos is that people don't trust people that they don't know well. And I think we'll touch on that a bit more later. Ian.
Cool, thank you. So many of us will have seen this this classic meme, and many of us will have lived the truth of it, or some semblance of the truth of it. So this is a decent representation of where we're coming from when we're talking about traditional silos in IT, when we're talking about the entrenched. And we'll start with DevOps because it's a decent place to start when you're exemplifying this stuff. So we've got our dev on the left and our helpless ops guy on the right. I'm taking the ops side here just for entertainment value. and that hand grenade's coming over and it's heading his way. He has no idea what's coming. So this formal separation of dev and operations is a really easy example of silos. It's often used with the DevOps straw man as the worst of worlds. So it's what we're trying to remove, in many cases. Not only dev versus ops, silos exist all the way down, and we'll cover that throughout the session. But this does set a context. So in this context, we're talking about the different priorities of the different silos that we're dealing with. In this case, we've got dev. They want change, they want to deliver, they want to push that feature out. We've got ops, they want stability, they want adherence to SLAs, etc. And then we've got the poor business product owner in the background just going, I just want my business value, please. And that would be lovely. Thank you. So silos often result in differing priorities throughout the organization, which can cause all sorts of bad things. Slide, please. Cool. So in that case, all silos are bad. We'll take that view. So it's certainly easy, and in some cases it's immensely convenient to paint all silos as bad and pop that big sign on the silo, and to blame them for the root of an organization's dysfunction. So throughout this session, we're going to explore that a bit and see where we draw that line and how true that is.
Okay, so it's very easy to go silos are bad. It's important to step that back and try and understand from a real business perspective why we're thinking they're bad. So taking a bit of a 5 whys approach, and you tend to end up at 3 different things. There is flow, so how smoothly we can get from brilliant idea to customers loving my brilliant idea and using it. How much waste there is, how much time there is, how much fighting there is to get from one end to the other. Rapid feedback, so Agile, DevOps, all modern software ways of engineering demand rapid feedback as the best way to learn and deliver the right thing at the right time, essentially, and be able to pivot. And that's just, over the last decade, especially, that need and behavior from end users to expect it has just risen and risen. Finally, cognitive load, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, but broadly, it's how complex a system a single person or group of people can cope with. If you're interested in a deeper dive into all those topics, didn't realize it was DevOps Book Club, but it is. Team Topologies by Skelton and Pays really gets under the hood of these things. Brilliant book. You will need to pay attention and use your little grey cells. Okay, Ian.
Cool. So reiterating, all silos are bad. So this is a layout of functional silos that, again, many of us will be intimately aware of. So in this case, I'm going to take it right to left because that's kind of how the disbenefits or the pain points for this approach actually kind of filter through. So in this case, again, I'll take the ops side, as is my want. In this case, you've got run. Because of the bottlenecks and the lack of information transfer in these silos, you've got run who don't know how to run the software. They weren't involved in dev or test to know what operational metrics are important at the right-hand side of this to make sure that the service is running properly and satisfying the business need. We've got the poor deployment guys who don't really have a pipeline. They're not really aware of what the run teams require. They're not really aware of what they're testing, what test automation is coming out of the dev side. And they're not really aware of what good looks like. We've got test. They aren't necessarily aware of the focus from dev because they weren't really involved in the inception of the service. And we've got the devs who possibly aren't fully aware of what the testers need, almost certainly aren't fully aware of the operating environment of the run guys. And then as we cascade back towards the business requirements identification, that can also be quite disjointed too because of the prioritization fights that we get between that interface, in that the business requirements desire X, the developers know they can deliver Y within the time frame that they're allowed by the project structure. We then get miscommunication and we get bottlenecks throughout. At the top there, we've actually got a little bit of in American parlance, a Hail Mary coming back with a feedback request. There's no, in this sort of functional silo world, there's not really a good place for that feedback to land often. So the entire thing becomes a little bit of a blame game. The message gets lost. It degenerates into that classic email chain of people going, it wasn't me, might have been them, and then round and round we go. And actually satisfying the business need becomes harder. And again, in this framework, each silos often are being completely different priority structures. So dev have shipping dates, they have to hit releases. Testing may well have benchmark requirements on their deliverables. Run are operating on an uptime SLA and a RTO RPO basis that possibly nobody else in that value chain is actually aware of. And if those silos persist, we've got wasted effort at every stage, and the process often just results in friction everywhere. So, and it's also easy to, because of those conflicting demands and conflicting value systems, we've got a complete lack of a coherent goal for what we're actually trying to deliver. So that's me going, again, silos bad. Yeah, next one, please, Ian. And then we have an approach to nirvana. Surely we have the DevOps way of doing things. We've got business requirements passing with fluidity from the product owners down through the team, through development. QA guys are completely integrated into this. They know what they're doing. The deployment pipelines are coming out. We're getting CI/CD value. Our release candidates are stable. Our run guys, who are often the same people in this sort of team, in this sort of broken silo model, they're running the software, they're writing the software. What's not to love? So yeah, in theory, again, this is an ideal pipeline for innovation, and it also does tend to engender a more shared understanding of what you're actually trying to do, of what you're trying to deliver. So I think to summarize, we have to kill all silos. Yeah, that's where we are. With the arguments that we're putting forward, silos introduce bottlenecks, they introduce slowdowns, they introduce lack of progress. So what we've seen so far is a simple view of the evil of silos, of knocking those silos down. We get benefits, we get real flow improvements, etc. But of course,
So thanks for coming to our talk. It's been great. Any questions?
Yeah, all done. Yeah. So yeah, we've successfully popped out. Yeah, we're running a bit early now. We've successfully put together a little bit of a silo straw man. We don't like them. We want rid. But of course, nothing is ever that clear cut. And for the remainder of the session, we are going to continue. We're not just going to play cat videos and things. What we're going to look at is why that isn't necessarily as simple as it sounds. It's always more complicated than it sounds, and why that easy answer doesn't tell the whole story. At which point I will hand back to my compere.
So just looking back to the prehistory, there must be good reasons for humans to work in silos. They cannot all be bad. So just ripping them all down is unlikely to come out with great results. But why is this? How does that make sense? From everything we've seen, it shouldn't be the case. Okay, so thinking about areas and going back to cognitive load. So the brain, it seems to be a combination of two things, of working memory and long-term storage, much like a computer. So your long-term storage, your hard disk drive in a brain actually is slightly better than a hard disk drive. It seems to be, within practicalities, almost limitless. Certainly though, when you get to my age, it takes a little bit longer to drag up some of the information, but generally it all seems to be stored there in perpetuity. The short-term storage, the working memory, your RAM, very much has limitations. Okay, there is only so much you can hold in your active working memory at any one time. Cognitive load is the words we use to describe how much your RAM can hold, basically. So the amount of mental activity imposed on that working memory at a specific time. So how does that relate to silos? The things that can affect your cognitive load and overload it are an abundance of new information, so too much novelty coming at you at once, and too high a number of elements in working memory interacting with each other. So complexity, in short. So once you hit cognitive overload, humans start to perform less well, essentially. Silos, obviously, help those things. They actually keep a cap on how much your brain is having to deal with at one particular time. Communications. So I expect lots of you have always seen a graph like this, but it very nicely describes how quickly communications paths get very complicated exponentially. It seems to be a in term at the moment. So we can see and visualize very nicely how quickly that increases. So in this diagram, if each node is a team or a silo that has to interact with another team in order to get something live, then very, very quickly it becomes clearly unsustainable, to the point where you've got 14 teams on the bottom right there. There is absolutely no way that you can sensibly keep those communication paths flowing all day, every day. This is a talk that has the word DevOps in it, so I am legally obliged to mention at this time Conway's Law. Okay. Conway's Law, as you probably know, states that any organization that designs systems will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. If the systems you design are a copy of the organization structure with these 14 teams in, I'm sure you can imagine the complexity and how usable and maintainable and operable that software is likely to be. So there's another place where silos, keeping things constricted to smaller groups, is a good way. And Conway's Law always seems to stay true, I think, to this date. And finally, another name, Dumbbar. So again, you've probably heard of the Dumbbar number. There are, in fact, many Dumbbar numbers. The Dumbbar number that's usually used is that 150 for friends. So that's basically, that was the number that was the typical size of those small villages through the ages. And this was what Dumbbar believed was the biggest group that one person can have a close relationship with. So that 150 is the biggest number of people that you can trust, basically, and aren't second guessing everything they do. Again, if we are working in smaller groups and can put boundaries around the number of people we're having to work with, you don't extend beyond having to second guess. And in fact, if you can keep it, the lower the better. 15 best friends. So that's people that you don't even have to, think about what they're going to do. You'll know they're going to do the right thing, and they're going to, have your back or be thinking in the right way. You don't get that throw a grenade over the wall to ops if you're best friends, hopefully. Ian's giggling.
I would never have seen that. Definitely never seen that.
Ex-best friends. So, in summary.
Yeah, so in summary, silos are bad. Silos are terrible. We've seen it. They reduce flow by causing bottlenecks and misunderstandings. We see every silo has independent, often not complementary goals. Communication paths break down. Feedback is often howling into the void. And yeah, terrible idea. Awful.
And also in summary, silos are good. They help manage cognitive load by putting boundaries around how much I'm having to think about and deal with at one time. And they keep intra-team relationships that are manageable. So I don't have to go, oh, those guys, I don't trust them to do the right thing all the time. And that keeps everything actually flowing better. So that's confusing. So what do we do, Ian? Do we smash the silos, or do we actually encourage the silos and build new, bigger, better walls?
Well, get the sledgehammer out, in my view.
Okay, so let's talk a bit around different sorts of silos, because I think this is what it really comes down to. So here is our vertical silos. So these are the ones I think we're saying are generally bad things. So in this picture here, we can see all the various teams, each have their own speciality. Actually, that ticks off the managing cognitive load box. That's a good thing. So because our VMware team only has to care about VMware, they can be really good at knowing about VMware. Similarly, our cloud teams, our release teams, etc. That's great. Everyone has enough active memory to concentrate on the thing they're doing and do it well. However, as you can see, there are complex communication paths. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, nearly up to that 14 picture that we saw there. Teams having to communicate with each other in order to get a simple feature through this maze all the way to live. And as we've seen again, that's not going to be a good thing. That's going to cause confusion. That's going to cause arguments. It's going to cause misunderstandings. And finally, it's going to cause bottlenecks. Again, who's to tell the VMware team that my piece of work is more important than another piece of work that's more important than them making sure the services are all patched and operational? So in general, vertical silos aren't always bad, but they probably have more downs than ups. So
how about this? How about we do something else? So we've got vertical silos. How about we look at horizontal silos? A lot of people will have seen this model employed in what became known as cross-functional product teams. So DevOps, I'll build it, I'll run it, eating our own dog food, etc., etc. All of those cool analogies that pop out of these tool sets and cultural changes. So in this case, when you have an aggressive horizontal silo, in effect, that you're trying to encapsulate everything that you need in that one unit of humans to deliver the value that you're trying to deliver. You build it, you run it, and you've got a few tick boxes on this one. So you've got the managed cognitive load. You only need to care about, in this model, you need to care about what you need to care about to deliver what you need to deliver, and that's end to end. These horizontal silos will contain the business value generator, your product owners, your BAs, your service design folks. They'll include to an extent, your platform folks, your dev folks, your QA folks, and then all of those people will actually be taking an active role in not only the development and delivery, but also the run. So you get quite a lot of synergy value there. Everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody's pulling in the same direction, etc. All sounds fantastic. You're reducing the bottlenecks and misunderstandings because you're operating at a small enough component of the Dumbbar numbers that Ian's already talked through, that the trust is there, the shared goal is there. You're understanding where you're trying to head with this effort. You've got rapid feedback because you sure as hell will get rapid feedback from a dev if they get woken up in the middle of the night because something exploded, and it'll get fixed the next day. That's the sort of cultural change that you're looking at with the horizontal silos. And it all sounds fantastic. There are a couple of things, and we'll come on to them in a moment, that you need to start to care about those. So there are some immediate questions in the two product teams on this slide. Do they exist in a vacuum? The answer to that question is invariably no. They don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in an organizational structure that's bigger than the two product teams. And how do you manage the interaction of those two product teams scaling up to a number of product teams, which we'll tackle next?
So yeah, it sounds like we've nailed it there. It's all green smileys all the way. That's clearly the solution to our problems. Thank you for coming to our talk. Yeah. Have we got more?
I think we've got another one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There is one question, actually. What happens when it all goes right? What happens when my company and my two product teams have built something so chef's kiss perfect, everyone wants peace, and we suddenly start scaling up? We suddenly start needing to deliver more and more. We hire loads of people. So there's my two teams, organizational growth over time. It's all going swimmingly. And then I do this. Right?
Yeah. So we've got a beautiful horizontal silo model on the previous slide, and we had green all over the place. Now what we've got loads and loads and loads of horizontal silos, and things start to degrade quite rapidly, alas, in this model. So in each horizontal product team, in each horizontal silo, we've still got an excellently managed cognitive load to start with. But probably only really well managed at the left-hand side of this picture. As it gets towards the right, it starts to erode, and many other things start to erode as well. So as you try and hold that value, that delivery potential in each one of those individual horizontal silos, you've got a corralled level of interest in everything else that's going on around you. But you're also, for each layer you go to the right, you're increasing complexity. You're almost certainly increasing dependency, and you're definitely going to be duplicating capability. And that's just, I always sum it up as, that's just physics. That's just how that works. So as you move to the right, some things start to get sacrificed as well, which are really important for your business, such as coherent architecture. If we speak to the technical aspects of what happens, each individual product team starts making the decisions that are interesting and useful for them. You'll see disparate approaches to common problems. You know, something simple like logging and monitoring. You'll end up with 15 different ways of running the service. And then if you ever want to consolidate those things, it becomes very, very difficult. You'll see a lack of standardization. And this calls back to the governance process that you have to put around something like this. And you are seeing an almost fractal and almost exponential growth of complexity as you get bigger in this model. And there lies a big issue. There is an alternative, which I believe Ian will cover.
Well, so clearly, this particular one, and just scaling our two teams, is fraught with problems and difficulties as we get bigger. So let's try something else instead. Instead of just duplicating that again and again, what I have is two really great teams here, high performing, managing end to end. They've got everything running beautifully. I don't want to create another 50 of those teams. So instead, I'll just put more work into those teams. So they can start to using all the processes that they've got, and they can just scale those and just do more with those two teams. So I'm not going to increase the complexity exponentially there, which is great. I've no new dependencies because I've still only got the two teams I had before. And Ian alluded to, I still need to manage the communication between those two, but there's still only two teams. That's great. But what I'm really doing is colossally overloading those two teams' understanding of what they're doing. As you can see, again, that exponential curve, instead of now being lots of little teams, becomes lots of information into one team. And the communication paths we saw earlier aren't now between lots of teams, they're between lots of people in that team. And you get exactly the same problems occurring with miscommunications, misunderstandings, different people working on different things, not talking. So horizontal silos are also giving us problems, whether we scale them in size or whether we scale them in number. It's a bit of a worry, this. I mean, silos are bad, so we're getting rid of silos, but then silos are good, so we put some more silos in, but neither of the silo types work. I mean, is there anything we can actually do that works? The answer is yes. Fortunately, of course, we're not all doomed. Well, in terms of software delivery, anyway. So 3 patterns that tend to work quite well for how you're managing those groups and sizes. So the as a service approach. So for teams such as governance teams, change management, platform teams, this works really, really, really nicely. So instead of having a team who manages all the things for your product from end to end, we will silo off a horizontal slice of it and take that away. In order to avoid creating dependencies, communications complications, what we do is turn that into an as a service. So you almost create a team level API there, so that for the platform team, for example, your software developers will want a server. Instead of having to talk to the other team about giving me a server, you just hit a standard API, get a server, and I can move on. So actually, I am deliberately siloing that team away. I don't want them having conversations. That slows down delivery, that breaks up the flow. The key here is really, really, really good product management. This will not work if that as a service team isn't delivering the service that the other teams need. But we build it in exactly the same way as if we were delivering a service to external customers. Again, you talk to them, you do market research, you test out features. Do you want this? Does this work for you? You learn rapidly. So again, that product management is absolutely key to that working. The next way, close collaboration. And I think we talked about that. That's your classic DevOps circles. of 2 or more teams working closely together to deliver business value. That's brilliant. But it works best if you use it now and then. If you set that up for these teams to be closely collaborating all the time, effectively, you've created one big team. And then you go back to that pattern where you're actually just resizing your teams as we go along and throwing more and more stuff into that team in terms of what they have to hold in that short-term memory. So use close collaboration at the time when the teams need to collaborate. The more you can design your systems, your approaches, your architecture to minimize that, the better. The final pattern is facilitating teams. So that's where you're bringing in subject matter experts at the point that you need it. So teams to help with a very specific task, teams to help with a very specific blocker that's in your way as a one-time thing. Absolutely, then bring them in, get them to help you and get them to coach you in that other team into knowing the right things to do in the future. I think SREs often come into this kind of pattern. So I might be building a system and what I need is someone who really knows how something scales massively. I want to build something that can deal with 1 million hits a minute, a second, whatever. I don't know how to build that. Bring in my experts, work with them to do it, get them to coach those best practices, then they exit. I keep my nice small team. We all know what's going on and how to do it, and we can carry on. So in reality, what you need is a mixture of all 3 of those. So it is very much making sure you've got the right approach at the right time. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, sorry. Okay, if I can give you one super clear takeaway, bad silos will appear if they're not actively managed. So over time, no matter how well you've set yourself up, as things change, but what we call bad silos will appear. So what you need to do is stay on top of them, understand them and manage them, and comes up with ways of mitigating and actually turning them into good silos. Making good boundaries to keep that cognitive load as low as possible. In other words, mind the gap. Jeez. Okay. And we've gone through that. And any questions? I guess there are a few, I think, up there.
Yep, so we've got some in. So let's make a start. So how do you figure out how many or maximize the use of specialists in product silos? So I think that question predated the final slide, which effectively described a parachutist model in some ways, in that you'll provide as a service solutions and facilitating solutions often for those true specialists, for those people that are going to be in demand but possibly not fully utilized all of the time in your deliveries. Would you agree, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as we said near the end, it's the right people at the right time. So that kind of, if you need specialists, I'm not quite sure what that was angling at. If it's,
I think it's going to be your SREs, your cloud architects, the sort of people that you need when you need them, but don't need all the time.
And I'd be careful about that a little bit. So again, your cross-functional team, you need to be careful who you're deciding you don't need all the time. I've seen people go, right, we'll just bring a security specialist in to help us with a bit. Yeah. No, wrong. That's someone who needs to be there the whole time. So again, as much as understanding and managing the silos and how they're working, you need to understand which bits of your cross-functional team you need there actually all the time as a standard. All right. Hello. More questions coming in. What are your thoughts? Hello, Ben. How are you? What are your thoughts? It's really weird not being able to see people.
It is, isn't it?
What are your thoughts on managing cognitive burden of products, services that are not actively developed? Interesting one. And it comes into, I think I've been having conversations recently about COTS products, off-the-shelf products, as opposed to develop your own, because they almost have the same question, really. End of the day, you have to have a team that owns the end-to-end, and that applies to an off-the-shelf product as much as it does for writing your own code. There are different concerns, obviously, for those, but a team has to own it. I think if you've got something that you need to spin up rarely, it's not actively developed. So if it's something that, you know, once a year I'll have to pick it up, run an update and do it. I mean, first of all, you would obviously try and, there's two things here. You would try and automate the ever-loving heck out of whatever it is you have to do on an irregular basis. I would worry about why my company is keeping a product or service running that is not actively developed. That feels like a recipe for you know, failure, being overtaken by the competition, that sort of thing. I guess if you have to have it, you just need to make sure you understand what, I guess, your spin up time is in terms of starting to remember how the heck the whole thing ran again. You've got that whole learning curve before you can start running with it each and every time.
I think that's one of the big things. I think it's that not losing the institutional memory around really mature, steady state products and services. It's not an easy challenge to address, to be honest.
No, but again, I think if it's not being actively developed, there's a big product management question to ask. Why? Is it really as perfect as it'll ever go, and no one will ever build a better version of this thing in another company and steal all our clients? Exactly. If there is such a thing, I want it found, and I want to build it, and I want to sell it, and then I want to just sit in as the money comes in.
Fair enough.
Okay.
We've got one from Michael. Can horizontal multi-team silos work without mature CI/CD routes to live? And the reason I picked straight out on that one is that Ian and I were discussing that just this morning. And it's a funny one. The answer, in my view, is yes, but you've got to have a really, really good interface between your development CI/CD delivery and your operations function. If they're part of the same organization, then arguably it's even a little bit easier, because you just have to make your peace within that horizontal silo that your release process isn't CI/CD, and sometimes it can't be. And you make your peace with that and work with it. But what we have also seen is delivery into an agile DevOps based managed service function, whereby you've got an agile project team in horizontal silo effectively on the left hand side, and then an agile DevOps driven managed service team on the right hand side. And then all you really need to do is lower that wall in the middle to such a point where the lack of true CI/CD doesn't necessarily matter that much. So yes, it can, but again, it's not the simplest of things to make sure, and it's all about communication for me.
Size work. Is that more, I'm not sure if that question's around your actual CI/CD route to live, whether we're talking about automated pipelines there. Mm-hmm. Can multi-team silos work without that? Yes, absolutely they can. Do you still have all the problems that an automated pipeline makes go away? Yes, you still have those. I would, you know, it doesn't have to be continuous delivery. A continuous integration would always be preferable. Again, it's that learning quickly what's going to go wrong. But if you've got manual deployments, that's going to be a problem. People will get stuff wrong because humans are humans. I guess if we've got a horizontal team, at least it's that team's own problem and that team's own risk appetite to accept the fact that my manual deployments may go wrong. So yeah, you know, you'd always want to automate your route to live and get as near to continuous delivery as you possibly can, I would suggest. Again, work out what your bottlenecks are. As I was saying to you here, there's, you know, I think it was Deming, can't remember, could be wrong, but anywhere you optimize that isn't your current bottleneck, you are absolutely kidding yourself and wasting your time, I think is the message. So have a look at how you get from idea to live, understand where the waste is. Now that might be inter-team communications, or in this case, it might be I'm having to wait for Bob to come and run the scripts or write the code that deploys stuff to live. Focus on whatever the bottleneck is and then move on to the next bottleneck, because there'll always be one. Hooray.
And likewise, we've got another question from another Michael. Do you have any ways for me to measure how siloed a team is or is not? Which I picked because it follows quite nicely on from that answer.
How siloed is a team? I'm not sure what silo scale we're working on really, and whether we're talking about good or bad silos, because I think that links into the question from anonymous attendee above. Is it possible for people to be members of more than one silo, and is that a good idea? It depends, again, what we define as a silo. So in terms of me getting my product from idea to live, I actually want to encourage siloed behavior and reduce communications with other teams as much as possible. Doesn't mean to zero. We're still part of the company and we still have governance, we still have security, but as much as possible, we want that autonomy in that team, because that improves flow, improves ownership. I'm not sure how you would measure it. I mean, you could do a simple count of how many times do I have to go to another team to do something for me. I think would be an interesting measure. Literally right the way from product owner or someone has an idea to all the way through to it's live and running. How many handoffs have I got in that? That would be an interesting measure. I'm not sure that necessarily. Yeah, no, I think that's
I've seen it measured on things like, and this is, I'm not suggesting this is a good thing, but I've seen it measured on things like dwell time. So when a task transitions from one team to another, often it'll cross a JIRA boundary or a ticket boundary in somewhere, and the dwell time with that team is measured, and the number of crosses of a boundary can often tell you a little bit about how siloed your process is.
Yeah, I think that's what lean approaches would refer to as waste.
Yes.
So yeah, that's also a good measure. So not only how often, but how long.
Yeah. True.
Okay. Any more questions? Time is it? How are we doing? Oh, not bad.
Look at that.
Thank you, guys. I think we got through everything there. So thank you so much for delivering today's session. Like I say to everyone, we did record today, so we will be following up. If you've got any more questions that we didn't cover, do drop us a line. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the festival.